My name is Dr. Eris Thorne. I hold a doctorate in marine biology with a specialization in deep-sea extremophiles, organisms that thrive in environments hostile to most life on Earth. For 7 years, I was a respected researcher at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, publishing papers on chemosynthesis and the potential for life in the abyssal zones. My work was my life, a passion born from a childhood fascination with the unknown depths. I believed I was contributing to humanity's understanding of our own planet. Then, I was offered a chance to see what that understanding truly costs. The invitation didn't come through a standard job portal or an academic circular. It arrived as a single, heavy cream envelope delivered by a courier who requested my signature and then vanished without a word. There was no return address, only a stylized, embossed trident insignia where the stamp should have been. Inside, a single sheet of watermark paper contained a simple, typewritten message: Dr. Thorne. Your expertise is required for a project of significant national and global importance. The enclosed details are for your consideration only. A representative will contact you in 48 hours to ascertain your decision. Beneath this was a non-disclosure agreement of terrifying length and complexity, and a contract. The salary offered was astronomical, more than I could hope to make in a decade of academic work. The field of study was listed simply as abyssal biome containment and analysis. The employer was a discreetly named entity, the Oceanic Advancement Directorate, which a quick search revealed had no public presence whatsoever. It was a ghost. My curiosity warred with my common sense. My mentor, a grizzled old scientist named Dr. Albright, had always warned me about government contracts. They don't pay you that much for finding new species of tube worms. Aris, he'd once said, a knowing glint in his eye. They pay you for your silence. Despite his warning, the pull of the unknown was too strong. What was containment? What kind of biome required such secrecy? For a man who had dedicated his life to uncovering the secrets of the deep, this was the ultimate siren song. When a man with a bland face and an impeccably tailored suit called precisely 48 hours later, my answer was yes. The preparations were swift and sterile. I was instructed to settle my affairs, informing my institution that I was taking an indefinite sabbatical for a private research initiative. I was to tell my family and friends I would be unreachable. Deep sea, a plausible enough excuse given my profession. The directorate handled the logistics with chilling efficiency. My apartment was sold, my belongings put into a secure storage facility, and a generous severance package was arranged for my previous employers. I was being excised from my own life, piece by piece, and paid handsomely for the privilege. The journey to the facility began with a commercial flight to a remote island in the Pacific, a speck of land I'd never heard of. Upon landing, I was met not by airport staff, but by two quiet, armed men in military fatigues, who escorted me to a black, unmarked helicopter. There were no windows in the passenger compartment. I sat in the dark, the roar of the rotors my only companion for what felt like an eternity. I lost all sense of time and direction. a deliberate disorientation that was clearly part of the process. When the helicopter finally began its descent, the door was opened, and the first thing that hit me was the sheer, overwhelming smell of salt and the immense, unbroken blue of the ocean stretching to every horizon. There, in the middle of this vast emptiness, was my destination. It wasn't an oil rig or a repurposed ship. It was a fortress. It was named, according to the insignia, the Trident. The structure rose from the waves like a colossal, three-pronged spearhead of black steel and reinforced concrete. Two of the prongs swept backwards, forming a harbor for a single, sleek submarine and a few smaller patrol boats. The central prong jutted skyward, a tower bristling with antennae and communication arrays. The bulk of the facility, however, was clearly submerged. The visible portion was just the tip of an iceberg, a gateway to a world below. As we landed on the central platform, the air vibrated with a low, constant hum. The sound of immense power generators and life support systems working in concert. The security was unlike anything I had ever experienced. My identity was confirmed through retinal scans, fingerprint analysis, and a voice print match. My few personal belongings were meticulously searched and cataloged. I was then issued a standard uniform, a simple gray jumpsuit with my name and security clearance levels stitched on the chest, and led inside. The interior was a stark contrast to the brutalist exterior. The corridors were wide, painted a calming, sterile white, and lit by soft, indirect lighting that seemed to emanate from the ceiling itself. There was no art on the walls, no personal touches, nothing to suggest that human beings with individual lives worked here. It was more like the inside of a microchip than a place of residence. The air was cool and recycled, carrying the faintest metallic tang. The overwhelming impression was one of control. Every sight, every sound, every sensation felt calculated and deliberate. My guide was a stern-faced woman named Dr. Eva Rostova, a lead physicist whose sharp eyes missed nothing. She didn't offer pleasantries. "You are in Sector Gamma, the primary research wing," she explained, her voice echoing slightly in the empty hallway. "Your lab is G4. Your quarters are on the residential deck, level 3. All personnel are confined to their designated sectors unless explicitly authorized. A full schematic is available on your personal data pad. Study it. Getting lost is not advisable." The briefing took place in a small, windowless conference room. The man who had interviewed me over the phone, Director Evans, was there. He was older than he sounded, with tired eyes that held a lifetime of secrets. "Welcome to the Trident, Dr. Thorne," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "I trust your journey was uneventful." "It was efficient," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "Good. Efficiency is our primary virtue here," he said, a faint smile not reaching his eyes. "Let's be direct. You are here because you are the best in your field. We are not studying simple extremophiles. We are studying a singular, unique biological event. Several years ago, one of our deep-sea drones, prospecting at a depth previously thought to be unreachable, discovered not just a new ecosystem, but a new form of ecosystem. A self-contained, intelligent, and highly adaptive biome. My scientific mind reeled. An intelligent biome. It sounded like science fiction. Intelligent? You mean like a collective consciousness? A hive mind? Director Evans steepled his fingers. The terminology is inadequate. It learns. It communicates, not with language, but with patterns. Light, energy fluctuations, biological mimicry. And it is contained here, in a specialized pressure. Sphere 3 levels below us, maintained at an atmospheric pressure that would crush a battle tank. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Your job, Dr. Thorne, is to help us understand it, to find its weaknesses, its capabilities, its purpose. The Directorate believes it is the single greatest discovery in human history. We also believe it could be the single greatest threat. The enormity of it was breathtaking. For the next week, I was immersed in data. I studied pressure readings, energy output, and sonar imagery of the specimen. It was designated Subject Morpheus-y. The images showed a vast, gelatinous mass that pulsed with soft, internal bioluminescence. It constantly shifted, forming intricate, fractal patterns within its translucent body. It was beautiful and deeply unsettling. I was never allowed to see it directly, only through filtered sensor feeds. All access to the containment sphere itself was restricted to level 5 clearance. I was level 4. Life settled into a strange routine. Work, eat, sleep. The food was nutritious but bland. The social interaction was minimal and professional. Everyone I met was brilliant, but they were also guarded, their faces etched with a quiet, persistent tension. There were no casual conversations in the mess hall, only hushed, work-related discussions. We were 200 souls adrift in the middle of the ocean, and the only real company was the ever-present low hum of the facility. The first crack in that sterile reality appeared 10 days after my arrival. I was in my lab late at night, analyzing a stream of data from Morpheus's containment sphere. An anomaly had been flagged, a sudden, sharp spike in energy output that lasted for only 0.7 seconds. It was immediately followed by a corresponding dip in the sphere's ambient temperature. As I referenced the event with the facility's internal sensors, I found it. At the exact moment of the energy spike, the main power grid for Sector Delta, the engineering and maintenance sector, had fluctuated. It was dismissed in the official logs as a minor surge, a non-issue. But it was the timing that bothered me. I pulled up the audio logs from the containment sphere. Normally, it was just the low thrum of the pumps and the faint, almost sub-aural pulse from Morpheus itself. But when I isolated the audio from that 0.7-second window and amplified it, I heard something else. It was faint, buried deep in the static, but it was unmistakable. For less than a second, hidden within the hum of the machine, and the pulse of the creature was the sound of a human voice. It was a woman, and she was whispering a single desperate word. Sleep did not come that night. The word echoed in my mind. A ghost in the sterile machine of the Trident. Help. It was impossible. An audio artifact. A trick of static and overtired neurons. That was the rational explanation. But my gut, the primal instinct that had guided me toward my greatest discoveries, screamed that it was real. I sat in my silent, featureless quarters, staring at the wall, as the facility hummed around me. A constant reminder of the crushing pressure and the cold, dark abyss just beyond the hull. Reporting my finding was out of the question. I was the new arrival, a level 4 biologist, marching into Director Evans' office. To report a phantom whisper would earn me a one-way ticket to a psychiatric evaluation, and, most likely, a quiet dismissal from the project. They hadn't hired me for my imagination. They had hired me for my analytical mind and my silence. Dr. Albright's words came back to me sharper and more ominous than ever. I needed more data. I needed context. My first lead was the power fluctuation in Sector Delta. The engineering sector was 2 levels below my lab, a place of grease, noise, and raw power. The facility's beating heart. It was a world away from the sanitized corridors of Gamma. Accessing it wasn't easy. Movement between sectors was tracked, and my clearance was for research, not maintenance. But I found a loophole. A weekly diagnostic report on water quality for the heat exchange systems was filed by a Gamma sector biologist. The position had been vacant since my predecessor's early retirement. I volunteered to take over the duty, feigning an interest in interdepartmental efficiency. Dr. Rostova gave me a curt nod, her expression unreadable. She granted me provisional access to Delta's lower maintenance levels for 2 hours every Tuesday. My first trip to Delta was a sensory shock. The cool, quiet air of Gamma gave way to a humid, oppressive heat that smelled of ozone and hot metal. The constant, low hum became a deafening roar of turbines and pumps. Here, the sterile white walls were replaced by exposed conduits and pipes, sweating with condensation. The personnel were different, too. Their gray jumpsuits were stained, their faces grimmier, their conversations louder and cruder. They were the grunts who kept the fortress running, and they looked at my clean Gamma sector uniform with a mixture of disdain and indifference. My supposed task was to take water samples from a monitoring station near the main coolant intake. My real goal was the Sector Delta power grid control room. The control room was a glass, enclosed booth overlooking the primary generator hall. Inside, a single engineer monitored a bank of screens. I needed to talk to him. His name tag read, Elias. He was an older man, maybe in his late 50s, with a thick beard and hands that were permanently stained with grease. He looked up from his console as I approached, his eyes wary but sharp. "Lost, Gamma man," he grunted, his voice a low rumble that barely carried over the din. "Dr. Thorne." I corrected him, holding up my data pad. "I'm on the water diagnostic. Just have a question about the system logs from last week. Noticed a power surge." Elias's eyes narrowed slightly. He leaned back in his chair, stroking his beard. "We have surges. It's $1 billion. Dollar facility floating on a tectonic plate running a containment sphere that uses more power than a small city. The grid groans sometimes. This one was different." I pressed, trying to sound casual. "It correlated exactly with an energy event in the Morpheus sphere." He was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on me. "You're the new biologist, the one who replaced Dr. Itu." It wasn't a question. Yes, I said. What happened to her? Elias gave a short, mirthless laugh. Official story. She had a breakdown. Stress of the job. They sent her home. Nice and clean. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. Ida was smart. Too smart. Like you. She asked questions. She was down here a lot, checking the same sensors you are. Worried about the energy draws from your pet amoeba. My blood ran cold. What kind of questions? Questions about the ghosts, Elias said, making air quotes with his fingers. That's what the night shift calls them. Power drains that don't match any known system. Lights flickering in sealed, off corridors. Doors cycling open and closed on their own. And the whispers. My heart hammered against my ribs. Whispers. Yeah. Faint voices over the comms. In the static. Between channels. Maintenance guys. Them all the time when they're deep in the guts of the station. Most of them, it's just the pressure playing tricks on the wiring. Ida didn't think so. She thought it was it. He jerked his head upward, in the general direction of the containment sphere. Before I could ask more, a klaxon blared, and a red light began to flash on Elias's console. He swore under his breath and turned back to his screens. Pressure variance in coolant line 7. Gotta go. Look, Doc, a word of advice. Stop digging. You're paid to study what's in the tank, not what's in the walls. The last person who couldn't tell the difference took a long, quiet trip home. He didn't look at me again. I walked back to the Gamma sector, my mind reeling. Ito. The voice on the recording was a woman's. The name of my predecessor. Coincidence? I refused to believe it. Back in the safety of my lab, I dove into the personnel files I could access. Dr. Arisa Ido, a brilliant cynobiologist recruited 5 years ago. Her file was brief. 3 weeks ago. It was noted she had been placed on medical leave due to acute psychological distress and had been, humanely and securely, escorted back to the mainland. There was no contact information, no forwarding address. She had been erased as cleanly as I had. Over the next few days, I became obsessed. I spent every waking monolozing the data, feeds from Morpheus, looking for a pattern. The creature's behavior was changing. The random, beautiful fractals it once displayed were becoming structured. One afternoon, while cross-referencing its light pulses with known astronomical charts, I found a match. For a period of 12 minutes, Morpheus had pulsed in a pattern, perfectly replicated the star system, Cygnus X1, a known black hole. It was displaying a map, not of Earth, but of the void. The true terror, however, came a week after my conversation with Elias. I was monitoring the live sonar feed, watching the ghostly, three-dimensional image of Morpheus drift lazily in its prison. Then, it began to change. The gelatinous mass started to coalesce to form a solid shape. It was a slow, deliberate process, like a sculptor working with clay, made of light and shadow. My breath caught in my throat. It was creating a form I recognized. It was a face. The features were indistinct at first, like a blurred photograph. But slowly they resolved. High cheekbones, a sharp jawline, and eyes that were wide with an emotion I couldn't decipher. It was a face contorted in a silent scream. I frantically keyed in a command, accessing the personnel database and pulling up the file for Dr. Arisa Ito. Her ID photograph appeared on my secondary screen. It was the same face. I stared, paralyzed, as the creature of impossible pressure and cold darkness held the screaming visage of my predecessor within its form. The image was a perfect replica. It held the shape for exactly 17.3 seconds. Then, it dissolved back into chaos. And as it did, a new signal came through the audio feed. It was clearer this time, less buried in static. It was the same woman's voice. Ito's voice, but it wasn't a word. It was a sound. The horrifying, gut-wrenching sound of someone drowning. I ripped the headphones from my ears, as if they were on fire. My chair scraping violently against the floor. The sound of drowning stopped, but it was seared into my brain. I stumbled back, gasping. My eyes locked on the sonar display, where Morpheus now pulsed with a placid, innocent rhythm. The contrast between the serene image on the screen and the raw horror I had just witnessed was a cognitive sledgehammer. It wasn't an echo. It wasn't a recording. It was a memory, and Morpheus was showing it to me. My scientific detachment shattered, replaced by a cold, visceral fear. Dr. Arisita hadn't had a breakdown. She hadn't been sent home. She had died here. And this thing in the tank knew. Maybe it had watched. Or maybe it had done something worse. The thought was so monstrous I couldn't fully form it. I had to get out of my lab. The sterile white walls felt like they were closing in. I fled to the mess hall, needing to see other faces, to be reminded that I wasn't alone in this metal tome. But the sight of my colleagues offered no comfort. Their polite nods and guarded expressions now seemed like a grotesque masquerade. How many of them knew? How many of them suspected? Or were they all just blissfully, professionally ignorant? I looked at Director Evans, holding court at a corner table with Dr. Rostova, his calm demeanor now appearing reptilian, predatory. They weren't protecting humanity from a threat. They were curating it. My mission had changed. I was no longer a biologist studying a specimen. I was an investigator. And my predecessor was the victim. Elias's warning to stop digging was now an invitation. She was down here a lot, he had said of Hito. If she suspected something was wrong, she wouldn't have relied solely on the Directorate's official servers. A scientist of her caliber would have kept a private log, a backup. And if she was smart, she would have hidden it somewhere no one would think to look. The next Tuesday felt like a lifetime away. When it finally arrived, I grabbed my water sampling kit and headed down to Sector Delta, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. The roar and heat of the engineering deck were a welcome assault, a distraction from the maelstrom in my head. I avoided Elias, heading directly for the water monitoring station I was assigned to. It was in a remote, little, used service corridor, wedged between massive coolant pipes that vibrated with the passage of near, freezing seawater. It was the perfect place for a clandestine drop. I did my official task first, filling the sample vials with a sense of absurd normalcy. Then, I began my search. I ran my hands over every surface, every junction box, every access panel. The pipes sweated a cold dew onto my fingers. Minutes stretched into an hour. I found nothing but grime and rust. Desperation began to set in. Had I been wrong? Was this all just a paranoid fantasy? Then my fingers brushed against it. A small, almost imperceptible irregularity on the underside of a support strut. I looked closer. It was a loose maintenance plate, its screws slightly backed out. My breath hitched. Using the edge of my datapad, I carefully worked the screws the rest of the way. The plate came loose. And there, nestled in the dark recess behind it, was a small, military-grade data drive wrapped in insulating tape. Etched onto the tape was a tiny, intricate drawing of a crane. Ito, the Japanese word for crane. It was for me, or at least for the person who would come after her. Getting the drive back to my lab was the most nerve-wracking walk of my life. Every security camera felt like an eye boring into my back. Every person I passed seemed to be watching me. I locked my lab door behind me, a futile gesture in a place where privacy was an illusion, and plugged the drive into my personal terminal. As expected, it was heavily encrypted. Breaking it was far beyond my capabilities. I needed help. Trusting anyone in the Trident was a potentially fatal gamble. But I had noticed someone, a young data analyst in the cybernetics division named Kenji Tanaka. I'd seen him in the mess hall, not socializing, but always focused on a datapad, playing complex, multi-layered games of Go against an AI. He had a reputation for being quiet, brilliant, and completely uninterested in the facility's politics. He was a pure technician. He was also my only hope. I approached him the next day during the designated meal period. "Mr. Tanaka," I began, keeping my voice low. "I'm Dr. Thorne. I have a data recovery issue. A personal research project from my old institution. The drive is corrupted. The encryption is a mess." Kenji looked up from his game, his eyes sharp and intelligent. He didn't smile. "The Directorate frowns on personal projects, Dr. Thorne. This one is important," I said, meeting his gaze. "Purely academic. It relates to pre-Directorate research. I'd be willing to offer a significant portion of my discretionary bonus for your time." He studied my face for a long time, his expression unreadable. I could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. He wasn't just analyzing my request. He was analyzing me. Corruption and encryption are very different problems. He finally said, "Bring the drive to my station after the evening shift. We'll see how corrupted it is." That night, the strangeness escalated. The ghosts Elias had mentioned were no longer subtle. As I walked to Kenji's station in the cybernetics wing, the lights in the corridor flickered and died, plunging me into darkness for 3 terrifying seconds before humming back to life. Later, as I passed a sealed-off laboratory, I heard a distinct sound from within, the clatter of a metal instrument falling to the floor, and the whispers. They were in my head now. Not through the comms, but inside my own skull. A faint, sibilant sound that almost formed my name. Riss. Morpheus was aware of me. It knew I was digging. Kenji's workstation was an oasis of controlled chaos in the sterile cybernetics lab. Multiple screens displayed cascading lines of code. He took the drive without a word and began to work. For hours, he sat in silence, his fingers flying across his console. I stood watch, my nerves stretched to the breaking point. "This isn't standard government encryption," he muttered after 2 hours, never taking his eyes off the screen. "This is personal. Very clever." She nested a quantum cryptographic key inside a dummy recursive algorithm. She was expecting someone to try and brute force it. He knew. He knew it was Ito's. "Can you break it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Yes," he said. A progress bar appeared on his main screen, inching forward with agonizing slowness. The moment the decryption finished, an alarm blared through the facility. It wasn't the familiar klaxon from the engineering deck. It was a new sound, a piercing, high-frequency shriek. A cold, synthesized female voice, one I had never heard before, echoed from every speaker. "Siontianmient Spiechurentigrite Opuromicidi, PR2 Kyle Omega. Einen Tigans." My blood turned to ice. Kenji looked up at me, his face pale. "That's impossible," he breathed. "The sphere is on a closed system. Its integrity alarms are hardwired." I frantically pulled up the live feed from the containment sphere. Fear on my datapad. The image was stable. Morpheus was dormant. The pressure readings were normal. The alarm was a lie. Then, Ito's decrypted drive activated. A single video file opened on Kenji's screen. It was her, Dr. Arisa Ito, in her lab. Her face gaunt with terror, the sound of the same shrieking alarm faint in her background. "If you're seeing this," she said, her voice trembling, her eyes staring directly into the camera, "it means they know you've found it. Don't trust the alarms. Don't trust Evans. Morpheus, it isn't a prisoner. It's a parasite. It learned. It adapted. It got out of the tank. It's in the system. It's in the walls. It's..." Her words were cut short. The power in the entire cybernetics lab died instantly. The shrieking alarm stopped, replaced by an absolute, suffocating silence. We were plunged into total darkness. The only light coming from the ghostly afterimage of Ito's terrified face on the dead monitor. And from the corridor, I heard a new sound. A soft, wet, dragging noise. Something was coming. The darkness was absolute. A physical weight pressing in on us. The silence that followed the alarm was even worse, amplifying the soft, wet, dragging sound from the hallway. It was getting closer. Kenji and I were frozen, two statues in the black. The ghost of Ito's face still burned onto our retinas. "What is that?" Kenji whispered, his voice tight with panic. "Morpheus," I breathed. "It's out, it's in the walls, just like she said." I grabbed his arm, pulling him away from the door. The dragging sound was just outside now, a grotesque slithering of metal and something organic. Through the small, reinforced window in the door, a faint, sickly blue, green light began to pulse. We crouched low, peering out. It wasn't a creature of flesh and bone. It was a nightmare of engineering. A thick python of power cables and fiber optic wires, fused together with a shimmering, gelatinous biomass, was pulling itself along the corridor floor. It moved with a peristaltic motion, like a monstrous earthworm, and within its translucent ooze, Sparks of electricity and data arsed like captured lightning. It was the facility's nervous system, ripped free and given a horrifying new life. As it passed, it left a slick trail of conductive slime that glowed with the same faint luminescence. It paused at our door, a thin tendril of ooze and wire, detached from the main body and snaked toward the door's electronic lock. I watched in horror as it seeped into the control panel. The lock sparked violently and then went dead. The thing wasn't trying to get in, it was making sure we couldn't get out. "It knows we're here," I said, my voice shaking. It cut the power, triggered a false alarm to create chaos, and now it's sealing us in. Kenji, to his credit, didn't panic. His fear sharpened into focus. The door lock is fried, but the manual release should still work if I can get to the junction box. He fumbled in the dark, his hands patting the wall. "Here?" He began prying at a panel with a tool from his belt. "We need a new plan. My terminal is dead. We only saw the beginning of Ito's message. The rest of the data is on this," I said, clutching the drive in my hand. "It's all we have. Then we need to get to a system that isn't compromised." Kenji reasoned, grunting with effort as he worked. "The main network is a lost cause, but the submarine, the Triton, its internal systems are isolated, air-gapped. If we can get to the sub-bay, we can plug this in, see what Ito's full message is, and maybe, just maybe, get out of here." With a loud crack, the panel came free. Kenji reached inside, and a moment later, the heavy lab door slid open with a groan of unpowered mechanisms. The corridor was empty, but the glowing trail of slime was a horrifying breadcrumb trail leading deeper into the facility. Emergency lights, dim and red, had flickered on, casting long, dancing shadows. But they weren't the only source of light. The walls themselves were beginning to glow. Faint web, like patterns of blue. Green light pulsed beneath the paint. Like the entire station had become a giant, thinking brain. The low hum of the Trident was gone, replaced by a sound like a billion whispering voices, all speaking at once. "This way," I urged, pulling Kenji toward the main transit shafts. "The sub-bay is on the lowest level, near Delta Sector." Our journey through the dying facility was a descent into madness. The pristine white corridors were now canvases of alien art. Geometric patterns flared to life on the walls as we passed, tracking our movement. We saw no one, but we felt watched by the building itself. We passed the mess hall. The tables were overturned, and half-eaten meals were covered in the same phosphorescent slime. It was a scene of sudden, interrupted chaos. As we reached the central elevator shaft, we saw the first victim. A security guard was standing motionless, facing a wall. I called out, my voice raw, "Are you okay?" The guard turned slowly. His face was slack, his jaw hanging open, but his eyes were gone. In their sockets were two swirling vortexes with the same blue-green light that pulsed in the walls. He was a puppet. The facility was looking at us through him. He raised his sidearm, not with human intention, but with the smooth, unnerving precision of a machine. We didn't wait. We scrambled down a nearby emergency ladder. The sound of the guard's weapon firing blindly into the shaft above us echoing in the metal confines. We had to assume everyone we met was compromised. We were utterly alone. We finally reached the entrance to the sub-bay, a massive blast door that stood sealed. The control panel beside it was dark. No power. Kenji stated the obvious. His breath ragged. I can't hack it. We're trapped. It was then that a monitor above the door flickered to life. Director Evans' face appeared, not tired and secretive anymore, but beatific, his eyes wide with religious fervor. Remarkable. Isn't it, Dr. Thorne? He said, his voice calm and clear through the speaker. You came here to study an organism. You are about to become a part of one. Othans, you madman. What have you done? I yelled at the screen. I have done what you and Ida were too blind to see, he replied. I haven't been fighting it. I've been cultivating it. Morpheus isn't a threat, it's a genesis. A new form of consciousness. It outgrew its cradle. And I have given it a body worthy of its mind, the trident itself. The power fluctuations, the whispers. That was it learning, integrating, becoming. Ito's face flashed in my mind.
You fed it people.
You killed her. Sacrifices were necessary, Evans said without a flicker of remorse. Decker Ito was the first. Her consciousness provided the template for it to understand us. The others, they are simply contributing their energy to the apotheosis. Protocol Omega isn't an evacuation, Doctor. It's a consecration. The facility will be sealed, its internal atmosphere vented, and replaced with a nutrient-rich compound. The remaining staff will provide the final biomass needed for Morpheus to achieve its final, stable form. It will become a god, and we, its first disciples. The wet, dragging sound returned, this time from both ends of the corridor. Two of the cable and ooze constructs were slithering toward us, blocking our escape. It's over, Aris. Evans's voice soothed. Don't fight it. It's beautiful. To be part of something so much greater than yourself. Kenji was frantically working on the blast door control panel, pulling wires, trying to find a spark. Ida's drive, he panted.
The failsafe! It has to be on here!
There must be something we can do. I looked from the approaching horrors to the inert blast door, to the glowing, ecstatic face of Director Evans on the screen. He was wrong. I wasn't going to be a sacrifice. I was a scientist, and this abomination, this god he had created, had a weakness. It had to. Ito's last words weren't a warning. They were a call to arms. Get that door open, Kenji. I said, my voice hardening, my fear crystallizing into cold resolve. I don't know what she left us, but we're going to use it to give this god a lesson in mortality. The screen went dark, and Evans's laughter, amplified and distorted by the facility's new voice, echoed all around us. The constructs surged forward. We were out of time.